With Martin Lewis.
At least 11 die, some 200 are injured in riots in Los Angeles. After the city's worst violence for 27 years, the mayor imposes a dusk to dawn curfew and puts the National Guard on standby. The reason? 4 white policemen accused of this beating of a black motorist are found not guilty despite the videotape evidence. A few minutes ago, looting was still going on and there are reports of more arson attacks. Good evening. President Bush tonight appealed to Americans to remain calm after an orgy of rioting, burning and looting in the second largest city in the United States. The violence in Los Angeles left at least 11 dead and 190 injured as rioters shot at firemen tackling blazing buildings and motorists were dragged from their vehicles and attacked. The rioting was triggered by a jury's verdict that 4 white policemen were not guilty of beating up a black motorist, even though the prolonged attack had been recorded on videotape. There were no blacks on the jury. A state of emergency has been declared and 2,000 National Guardsmen have been moved to strategic points throughout the city. The riots took place in an area of around 100 square miles. The biggest demonstrations were in the downtown area around the City Hall and the police department headquarters. The South Central residential area is under a dusk to dawn curfew. It's now lunchtime in Los Angeles and we're getting reports of more looting and arson attacks in the riot-affected area.
The smog that normally hangs over Los Angeles gave way this morning to the smoke from the dozens of fires that had burned, in some cases, all night. Local residents saw for the first time the wreckage of the worst rioting in Los Angeles for 27 years. Dozens of shops, warehouses and businesses in one of the city's most depressed areas had been destroyed. In most cases, there was nothing to salvage, just start again. Behind this was an orgy of violence that left around a dozen dead. Many more injured, some from gunfire, others from being indiscriminately attacked by mobs on the rampage.
Oh, look at that. Terrible. And there's no police presence down here. They will not enter the area. That's right. This is attempted murder.
This had been the guardhouse at police headquarters. Now it's in ruins. It's a similar story at City Hall. Across the sprawling LA suburbs, many of the fires lit by the angry rioters had to be left to burn themselves out because firemen and police had become the object of physical attack.
We were clearly overwhelmed. We, at a period of time from midnight to about 3 o'clock, we were getting about a little over 3 new fires a minute were coming in that we were having to cover, and in cases before we had resources, we were having to queue up on those fires. We had great response, though, from the people to assist us. It was very, very sad. We had numerous occasions when there were attempts to kill firefighters. And here you have a group of people that are out doing their absolute best to protect others' lives at their own, and people are trying to kill them.
As the attacks continued, the police fought back, killing 2 snipers in one fierce gun battle. As the destruction went on, a state of emergency was declared, and the mayor, who's now declared a curfew, said even though he'd called on the people to protest, this wasn't what he had in mind.
We cannot and we will not tolerate any violence as a means of expressing anger or concern about the verdict. So let's put that apart from what we're dealing with today. We are going to enforce the law. We are going to have adequate resources from every level of government to deal with that matter.
The president, whose call to calm last night was ignored, appeared serious today and said the Justice Department was reviewing all aspects of the case. But he stopped short of condemning the verdict and refused to take questions.
We are concerned about any question of excessive police violence, and we are equally concerned about excessive public violence. The murder and destruction in the streets of Los Angeles last night and today must be stopped.
But other politicians say the anger is understandable, if not excusable, and they called on the Justice Department to find another means of punishing the policemen involved if public anger is to be satisfied.
That we think that the situation not only in Los Angeles but across this nation is extremely volatile, and we want them to make this decision with all due haste.
As the day draws on, troops from the National Guard have been drafted into Los Angeles to prevent more violence tonight. But it may be too late. Already there are reports of new fires being started, and the atmosphere is described as very tense indeed. Richard Quest, BBC News, New York.
President Bush said tonight that the American government was considering whether to bring civil rights charges against the 4 policemen. A senior member of the Attorney General's office will head the investigation. Our legal correspondent Joshua Rosenberg reports.
It was quite by chance that a man who'd been trying out a new video camera on his balcony happened to film white Los Angeles police officers beating up a black motorist who'd been stopped for speeding. While the camera was running, Rodney King was hit 56 times with solid aluminium police batons. After the 4 officers had been charged with using excessive force, they managed to get the trial moved to an area 60 miles away from Los Angeles, claiming that the area where few black people live was racially neutral. Even there, it took a month to select 12 jurors who'd not seen the video on television. The jury was predominantly white. It included just 1 Asian woman and 1 Hispanic man. The motorist, Rodney King, was not called to give evidence. He had a criminal record, and tests showed he'd been drinking before he was stopped. His lawyer was outraged by the jury's verdict.
It sends a bad message. It says it's okay to go ahead and beat somebody when they're down and kick the crap out of them, and it's okay because if it's not videotaped, don't worry about it. Another brother officer won't turn you in.
And one of the 4 officers said he wasn't surprised at the verdict.
I mean, it's hard to be surprised when you felt that way the whole way. You're just hoping for the right decision. And because, you know I'm innocent, and that was the verdict.
This morning, one of the jurors spoke about the verdict. She said that after they'd watched the videotape in slow motion, the jury had concluded Mr. King had repeatedly resisted arrest and brought the violence on himself.
He was in total control all the way. When he decided to be handcuffed, to be arrested, he simply put his hands behind his head, and the arresting was completed.
The United States Attorney General, William Barr, said he was considering bringing criminal charges against the 4 police officers on federal civil rights grounds.
Nothing in the state process is binding on us federally. There are 2 different sovereigns, and so there is no issue of double jeopardy here. What we are looking at is whether there was intentional infliction of excessive force, which may constitute a violation of the civil rights laws.
The 4 policemen cleared today were not the first officers to be accused of assaulting black people. Recently, an independent commission found a pattern of widespread bigotry and brutality in the Los Angeles police. The federal prosecuting authorities will now be under intense pressure to make sure that the case against the 4 men doesn't end here.
I'm joined now on the phone by our chief North America correspondent, Gavin Esler, who has just arrived in Los Angeles. Gavin, what did you see as you flew into the city tonight?
Well, it's a very clear day, Martin. It's a very sunny day. There is some smog, but there are at least 4 extremely large fires pouring a lot of black and grey smoke into the air, at least 4. 3 of the 4 seem to be in south-central Los Angeles, the area which has seen, I think, the worst of the violence. One other one is a bit to the west of that, which is where I am calling from now. It looks an extremely nasty scene, and as far as one can tell, there is no sign of it abating.
I gather you were with someone who knows the south-central area where the rioting took place well. What did he have to say about the scene as he saw it?
Well, I think one of the most striking things is that the slang term nines is used for 9mm semi-automatic pistols on the streets of the United States. And a lot of the drug dealers regard that as the weapon of choice. So some of those drug dealers who do operate in the area of South Central Los Angeles are quite heavily armed, and there are great fears that those semi-automatic pistols, things like a Glock 17, which can discharge 17 bullets as quickly as I can tell you about it, will be used and have been used against the police and the other authorities. It's for that reason that the National Guard has been sent in.
Is there fear that there are more to come tonight, more riots?
Well, I always hesitate to predict violence, but it's certainly going on now, and as I say, it shows no signs of abating. I think there are two quite separate things going on here. One is the kind of legitimate protest from people who don't like the verdict, and obviously in a free society, the mayor has said that's quite permissible, and there are no problems with that. The other is simply the looting and the arson and the murder, which is being carried out by people, according to the gentleman I was talking to, who would do that sort of thing anyway. I think on a good day, South Central Los Angeles is dangerous, and this is certainly not a good day, and everyone does expect a rather bad night.
What long-term damage do you think that the rioting is going to do to race relations in the United States?
Race relations here are regarded politically as what's called a wedge issue. It divides whites from blacks. We saw it in the 1988 election campaign with the Willie Horton ad, which was regarded by many people as being racist. So it doesn't take much to throw race relations off course. What I suppose the authorities are hoping for is that the National Guard and police will be able to establish some order, and then the question of further proceedings against these officers may be considered. All that will give tempers some time to cool, and of course, if that were to happen, then perhaps the looters might find there's not much more to loot, frankly.
Gavin, let's hope so. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
The mayor of Los Angeles has called for another 4,000 National Guardsmen to be sent to the city after another night of rioting and looting. 24 people have now been killed and more than 900 injured.
The rioting has spread from the mainly black areas of central Los Angeles to more affluent districts, including Hollywood. There's also been violence in several other American cities. First, from Los Angeles, this report by Kevin Dunn.
Hollywood burning. For the second successive night, arson and anarchy across Los Angeles as the city fell to the mercy of the mob. It began as a race riot in a southern ghetto. It has become an uprising against authority. All day, police battled to contain the looting. In many cases, they were left chasing vainly as stores were stripped, shelves emptied, businesses laid bare. They did make some arrests, but too often they arrived too late.
They were looting my store. When I got there, they tells me the insurance is gonna pay. It's nothing personal. We don't mean it, and I'm sorry.
And I have to look at this and then watch these people teach their children to go into stores and take things and steal. I'm ashamed of my own people.
The culprits weren't only blacks. Whites and those of Asian and Hispanic origin joined in a free-for-all of LA lawlessness. In one ethnic quarter, Korean shop owners armed themselves to protect their business. Confrontation came quickly, live on television.
This is live right now. This is live.
We don't see this very often. Okay, this is unprecedented. We haven't seen firing like this in the streets of Los Angeles.
Linda Moore,
amid the mayhem, the spark which set it off was almost forgotten. The shock acquittal of the 4 white policemen prosecuted for the videotaped beating of black motorist Rodney King. How the jury, which included no blacks, returned not guilty verdicts continued to outrage millions. But one juror was unrepentant.
Even knowing now, I still can't change what I did. I would still, knowing even that there's a chance that this would happen, I can't change how I felt and how I voted.
Before the verdict, police claim to have made contingency plans for protests, but the scale of the rioting has overwhelmed them.
We were simply overwhelmed and not able to get to some of those incidents that we regret not getting to.
So thousands of National Guardsmen, state troops armed with M16 assault rifles, have been brought into Los Angeles, which is still under a state of emergency and a dusk to dawn curfew. It's now dusk, and the normally bustling, blaring streets of Los Angeles are virtually deserted as the curfew begins to bite.
The only sound across the city is the wailing of police sirens and the thunder of helicopters overhead. And above everything, an intense pall of smoke, as the fires that have raged out of control have now spread to the heart of Hollywood.
As the disturbances continued after dark, police made more arrests. But the beleaguered city mayor acknowledged that to regain control, he might ask President Bush to send in the federal army.
We are totally committed to provide the resources to ensure that the hoodlums out there, the gangsters, are not going to be able to terrorize the city.
That city, the City of Angels, a tinsel town so proud of its glittering image, wears an uglier face today. Kevin Dunn, ITN, Los Angeles.
There's been unrest in several other widely scattered parts of the United States. From the West Coast to the East Coast came reports of more rioting and looting. Curfews were imposed in San Francisco, Las Vegas and Atlanta.
I think they're on it. A curfew and hundreds of arrests in San Francisco overnight. A picture repeated across the country as anger at the Rodney King verdict spilled onto the streets. Shops were looted, motorists were attacked. More than 300 people were taken into custody. In Atlanta and Las Vegas, a similar picture, and in both cities a nighttime curfew as police stations are firebombed and passers-by attacked. Even America's small cities were hit. In Madison, Wisconsin, the windscreens of 3 dozen police cars were smashed. As the death toll rose, the condemnation from the White House grew. Mr. Bush preparing today to meet black leaders to discuss the violence.
Watching the television coverage of the violence yesterday afternoon and evening could have any reaction other than revulsion and pain. And mob brutality, the total loss of respect for human life, was sickeningly sad.
Black leaders will urge Mr. Bush to reopen the King case.
It is a sad time in America and a very painful time for those of us who struggle with the question of justice and equality in this country.
Across the country, they've watched in horror, even at this police seminar.
This is going to set back law enforcement at least 50 years. It's going to set back our justice system probably 100 years. I mean, the system didn't work.
When I come on duty tonight, I'm almost to the point now where I do not want to do any traffic stops for a couple of days to let this simmer down.
Racial division lurks beneath the surface of American life. Black protesters were taunted in Cleveland last night by whites in a van displaying a Nazi flag. But the protests in this case have been by blacks and whites, and the protests have been widespread. The authorities are now putting their faith in curfews, thousands of troops, and reason. Bill Neely, ITN, Washington.
Now, for the very latest word on what's happening in Los Angeles, I'm joined now by Lieutenant John Duncan of the city's police department. Well, Lieutenant, what is the situation at present?
Well, relatively speaking, this morning has been a much better morning than yesterday was. There's substantially less looting and burning of buildings going on. In fact, the numbers of fires are manageable, and the fire department is out there handling those issues. The curfew seems to be holding. If the absence of vehicles and pedestrians on the streets can be a measure of that, it seems to be having a positive effect. And we seem to be making some headway now.
We have seen looters going in and out of stores, people firing guns on the streets. How can you possibly begin to tackle that sort of disorder on this scale?
Well, that's in fact what we have done, and we've had considerable success since the curfew went into place at 6 o'clock last evening. We haven't had incidents of that sort for some time now, and hopefully this signals an end to this, to the violence that's been going on here.
We've heard that the trouble has spread to Hollywood. Lots of British people will be familiar with Disneyland. Was that area threatened at all?
Oh, not at all. I'm not aware of any incidents. That's quite some distance from downtown Los Angeles. maybe 30 miles east of here, and at this time I'm not aware of any incidents there.
So are you saying that you're reasonably optimistic this coming weekend that the trouble may in fact die away?
I think that may very well be the case. We have a substantial police presence in the area now. We have the California National Guard is here, along with a substantial presence from other local law enforcement agencies that are here to assist us, and we're making arrests now. We have a strong enforcement posture, and we seem to be making progress. So we're optimistically looking forward to continued progress this weekend.
Lieutenant Duncan in Los Angeles, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
You're welcome.
The Association of British Travel Agents is advising British tourists to go ahead with holidays to the United States, but it says they should stay away from troubled areas. This morning, tourists on their way to Los Angeles from Heathrow said they would definitely not cancel their holidays.
Holidaymakers flying out to Los Angeles this morning were determined not to let the violence there spoil their plans.
Part where I'm flying to, I'll be fairly safe because I spoke to my aunt and my cousins and they're well away from all the trouble, so just have to obey by the curfew rules and see how it goes from there.
I shouldn't have watched TV last night because I was watching it last night and saw them pulling people out of cars and things like that. So I'm just hoping things would have calmed down by the time I get there.
Most of those travelling had taken advice on whether to fly. This American cut short his stay in Britain, anxious to get home to his family.
I wasn't supposed to go back till next Wednesday, but I'm going back today because I have a wife there and property that I'm concerned about, and I'm very, very distressed.
People with flights already booked to Los Angeles are not being told to postpone, but the Foreign Office advice is to take extreme care and avoid the trouble spots.
The areas where most of these fires have been happening are actually ghettos where people wouldn't want to go to anyway. But most people stay to the south of Los Angeles, and if you are in the centre, then the chances are you're going to be moved out to the southern areas.
Nearly all flights to Los Angeles are going ahead today, though British Airways have cancelled a small number. Louise Bevan, ITN, Heathrow Airport.
Back now to our main news, the rioting in the United States, which of course started in Los Angeles. In 2 hours' time, President Bush will meet black leaders at the White House to discuss the crisis. One of them is the civil rights campaigner Benjamin Hooks. He joins me by satellite from Washington now. Mr. Hooks, I gather Mr. Bush has said that he wants a listening session with you. What are you going to say to him?
Well, first of all, I will point out that we think that one of the best things that can happen now, in our federal statutes, there is a provision that these officers can be tried again under federal law. It was put into our statutes way back, right after the Civil War, to deal with situations where the state would not adequately prosecute. If we are to satisfy the demand of justice of blacks and whites all over this nation for an obviously flawed verdict, this is the one thing that the president can do. In addition to that, we've got to deal with the economic underlying this, the lack of jobs, the lack of hope, the bad educational systems. We've got to start dealing with the recommendations of the Kerner Commission report issued 25 years ago, which still have not been fulfilled. These are some of the things I will be saying to President Bush today.
Do you think the president will be rather reluctant to proceed further against these officers, because he will surely get a lot of opposition in his own party, won't he?
Yes, he will get opposition, but I have to think and believe that the number of white people in this nation who are decent and compassionate and who would like to see justice will react. We had at our office yesterday at the NAACP more than 800 telephone calls from black and white. Every one of those calls expressed outrage and indignation at the verdict. There have been white school children in New York City who have demonstrated against the verdict. My judgment is that most of the white people of this nation are fairly decent and compassionate, and that President Bush would make a horrible political mistake if he catered to the whims of a far right-wing minority who could not elect him if they wished to. I think that even so, President Bush, as a leader of all of the people of this nation, must rise above petty politics and deal in a statesmanlike manner with a very serious problem. The Los Angeles Police Department has been out of control for years, but is only symptomatic of the fear that black people feel in this country, all over this nation, for the police departments, because too many times black men riding along at 2 o'clock in the morning are fearful that they can be mistreated. And let me say that I'm not condemning the police department as a whole. There are many good policemen, of course. But these who are bad, these who need psychological treatment, these who need to be fired have got to be dealt with. And President Bush has to make the first move by going through the federal law which provides for that.
Benjamin Hooks in Washington, thank you very much.
The 1 o'clock news from the BBC.
The Los Angeles riots, more deaths and injuries, and the trouble spreads to Hollywood and other cities. Thousands more troops head for Los Angeles. President Bush calls in black leaders. Good afternoon. The death toll in Los Angeles has doubled in the last 24 hours and has now reached at least 30, with up to 900 people reported injured. National Guardsmen have been drafted into the city to enforce a nighttime curfew. It's now 5 o'clock in the morning and the streets are reported to be quiet. The Los Angeles Fire Department has tackled more than 1,000 fires. The looting and arson began in the South Central area, immediately after the acquittals of 4 police officers on Wednesday. It spread north to Hollywood and as far as Long Beach in the south. Elsewhere, curfews are in force in San Francisco, Las Vegas and Atlanta, after angry demonstrations led to looting and attacks on police stations. Violence has also been reported in Tampa, Florida, Birmingham, Alabama, Madison, Wisconsin, and in Omaha, Nebraska. There have been reports of fighting between black and white high school students in New York and in the states of Maryland, Tennessee, and Texas.
Anarchy on the streets of Los Angeles as the mob, which originally sought justice for the victim of a police beating, turned to take its profits from the mayhem it had caused. America has never witnessed scenes like this, worse even than the Watts riots of 1965. Supermarkets, furniture stores, hi-fi shops all fell victim to the rampage of destruction. After 2 days and nights of unrest, damage is estimated at more than £100 million. In some cases, the looters had so much time, they were queuing up to take their spoils. At the height of the rioting, the only order in effect on the ground was the law of the gun. After seeing dozens of local stores robbed or destroyed, one group of Korean shopkeepers took up arms to defend their property, firing wildly to deter rioters. Elsewhere, guards armed with submachine guns patrolled the roof of another store. With the violence showing no sign of abating, the mayor of Los Angeles asked for 4,000 more National Guards to back up the 2,000 already sent to impose some kind of order. If necessary, U.S. Army troops will also be drafted in.
In addition to the law enforcement agencies here and the National Guard in California, that we ought to have a standby alert in the event we need federal troops to come in and back us up.
Anger and with it violence have spilled onto the streets of other American cities following the acquittal 2 days ago of 4 white policemen on charges of brutality. In San Francisco, more than 400 demonstrators were arrested after their protest was broken up by police. The mayor declared a state of emergency when looting broke out in the city center. To the north in Eugene, Oregon, hundreds of students attacked and tried to break into the city hall. In Atlanta, Georgia, passers-by were attacked by a group of young black demonstrators who'd broken away from a peaceful protest, smashing windows and ransacking shops. And in Cleveland, Ohio, racial tensions were heightened further when another protest was disrupted by right-wing extremists. As civilians joined Los Angeles fire officers in dousing the flames, there is still a threat of further conflict, with some citizens threatening to take the law into their own hands to defend their homes.
I'm going to protect my city and my area.
You willing to use a gun to do it?
Absolutely. That's what they're doing to us. They're killing our cops.
The dusk to dawn curfew in the city appears to have succeeded in containing the violence, although for the first time the police have overnight been opening fire.
As the fire trucks arrived, they were being shot at, so they would just pass up the fire location and they'd make another detour and come back, and they kept getting fired at. So finally they had to take a stance. Police had to start firing back.
The real test of whether order has returned to Los Angeles will only come with daybreak in the next few hours.
The governor of California, Pete Wilson, has warned that all necessary means will be used to quell the unrest. He said the authorities cannot and will not tolerate violence as a means of expressing anger over the acquittals. Our correspondent Gavin Esler witnessed the second day of violence.
Sunset in the City of the Angels, and Los Angeles goes into its second night of violence and looting, the air filled for miles with smoke and fumes. There were uncountable incidents of disorder from the black areas of South Central right through to Sunset Boulevard, Beverly Hills to the heart of Hollywood, across the expanse of this massive, sprawling city. Along the world-famous Magic Mile of Hollywood Boulevard, firefighters attempted to put out a string of blazes following arson attacks and looting.
We're now more than 10 miles away from where the rioting and looting first began. This is Hollywood, the city where dreams are made. Tonight, it's a nightmare of civil disorder.
Looters at a Hollywood liquor store were arrested. One stole just 2 bags of ice. Even the LA police, famously hard-bitten, could not quite comprehend the sense of raw anarchy.
Ridiculous, isn't it? There are kids involved in this, and they are organized, and they have weapons, and they have drugs, and they've been looking for an excuse. Well, I shouldn't say looking for, but that verdict was the straw that broke the camel's back.
There were so many fires, the emergency services could not effectively deal with them, though they were helped by many ordinary citizens. More than 1,000 fires so far was the best guess, and as police guarded firemen on one block, the arsonists merely moved on to the next target. Surveying the self-inflicted wounds of their burning city from the Hollywood Hills, many local people were disgusted and depressed that the Rodney King beating trial verdict should have led to this.
I don't understand why that verdict